Okay, so now I want to focus on topic, I believe it's 4.2, which is about the roles of or the tasks of the government in a mixed economy. Yes, describe the tasks of the government in a mixed economy. Right, so you'll see that many of the content that should be included in this question has already been covered in other topics, in other videos. So I'm not going to repeat myself. I'll just refer to the other videos whenever this is necessary. So of course, the first thing that we must do in this case is to explain what a mixed economy is. And for that, please refer to the video on economic systems. And remember, you should start from the very basic economic problems, scarcity. We don't have enough resources to to satisfy all wants, so we have to make choices on what we're going to produce with the resources that we have. We have to decide how to allocate them between competing users. And essentially, there are three questions we must answer: what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce. And an economic system is a system that basically allocates resources, that answers those three questions to find the best possible allocation of resources. And yes, there are three main economic systems, two extremes that are mostly theoretical benchmarks. In practice, we are always somewhere in between. So free market economy, again, I'm just summarizing the key elements. You have more details in the video on economic systems. Basically, free market economy, no public sector. All resources are owned by private individuals, no government intervention in the economy, and resources are allocated by the forces, market forces of supply and demand. Okay, what we call price mechanism. Price will determine how much we produce, and depending on how much we produce, firms will allocate the required amount of resources. Simple. On the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, we have the planned economy, where it's the opposite. There is no private sector. Everything is owned and controlled by the government, especially resources like natural resources and capital equipment owned by the government. And it is the government who decides what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce. Okay, so they are in theory no market. The government decides pretty much everything. All right, and that's basically how this works. In practice, all countries are somewhere in between these two benchmarks, and a type of economy that combines elements of a free market economy and elements of command economy. Well, basically, where we have markets where most resources are allocated through the market forces of supply and demand, but where the government sometimes intervenes is something that we call a mixed economy, right? So, key characteristics of a mixed economy is that you have a public sector and a private sector, that they coexist in the economy. Certain economic activities are owned and controlled by the government, others are owned and controlled by private individuals, firms, or organizations. Again, like I said, most resources are allocated by the market forces of supply and demand, but sometimes when the market does not do a good job, or I don't want to rush too much, but basically there are certain reasons for which a government intervenes in mixed economy. And there are three main reasons. Reason number one, correct market failures and market failures. There is a video on market failure. I think it's only the audio because I had a problem with the camera, but listen to the audio. So I need in particular, please focus on externalities. This should be number one in terms of market failures and public goods. Okay, but you can also talk about market powers, and you can talk about information failure as well. But there are situations in which the market fails, which means that the market does not allocate the right amount of resources to production in that particular market. It's either that the market will allocate too many resources, that's an over allocation of resources. For example, when we have a negative externality, or when we have a demerit good. And there are instances where, on the other hand, the market will not allocate enough resources to the production of a particular good or service. That's an under allocation of resources. That's typically what's going to happen in the case of a positive externality or with a merit good. It's also likely to happen when we have a monopoly power because the monopolist is going to charge a high price, and if the price is too high, the quantity traded is going to be too low. To some extent, it's also what happened with the public good because, in fact, we will not have any resources allocated to the production of public goods in a free market economy. There is already a video about that, but you should focus on the causes of market failures and perhaps just briefly outline some solutions and policy instruments that can be used to correct these market failures, in particular, taxes and subsidies, price control, regulation. I would say that these are the three primary instruments. Could be quotas. Why not? For pollution, you could have emissions permits, where firms they buy the right to pollute, tradable emission permits. Yeah. That's basically it. It's okay if we focus on that. Please watch the video to learn more about how to correct market failures. Number two, so that's mostly from a micro perspective. From a more macro perspective, governments often intervene in the economy to reduce inequalities. And by the way, what do we care? Why not just accepting inequalities? Well, because in most societies, there is what we call an aversion to inequality, which essentially means that people don't really feel comfortable living in a society where inequalities are very wide, because we all have like a sense of justice, a sense of what's fair and what's not. And we, again, as a society, we are willing to take actions and to make some sacrifices to guide our economies, our societies towards something that is regarded as more equitable, more fair. So on the one hand, when we talked about market failures, we were really talking about efficiency, really about making sure that resources are objectively allocated in the best possible way. Reducing inequalities, on the other hand, does not have to do with efficiency, but mostly fairness or equity. If the free market leads to a distribution of income, for example, that is regarded as inequitable, unfair, the government might step in to try to protect those who are the most vulnerable. And usually this involves income redistribution, where we would redistribute income from high-income households to low-income households. So how do we do that? Well, there are several instruments that can be used, mostly by the government. Well, this market is better. We can use progressive taxation. In most countries, income tax or inheritance tax or not even inheritance tax, progressive tax. Yeah, I think income and inheritance tax are probably the best examples. Progressive taxes. Remember, progressive taxes have a greater incidence on high-income households. There can be, on the other hand, what we call means-tested benefits. Means-tested benefits are benefits that are targeted at low-income households. If you're too rich, you can't get them. There are certain benefits that everybody can have. We call them universal benefits, but they are not very effective at reducing inequalities. If you want to reduce inequalities, you need to make sure that the benefits, remember, benefits are money that is paid by the government to people. You need to make sure that these benefits only are targeted at low-income households. So it could be anything, like in the US, you have Medicaid, that is like free healthcare for poor people. You could have a certain like sickness benefit, disability benefit, unemployment benefits that are targeted at those who are the most vulnerable. So yeah, it's okay in fact if you just say benefits, because benefits usually they tend to target people who are the most vulnerable. Could be to provide free education and healthcare. You know, these are goods that are important to everyone. And everyone should have access to basic education and healthcare, regardless of their financial needs. So that's of course something that decreases inequality, because especially this is something that can decrease generational inequalities, because even if you are from a poor family, you can go to school, you can be in good health, you can build up your human capital. So this is something that can reduce the extent of inequalities. Okay, so progressive taxation could be regulations, like policies that would prevent any kind of discrimination. For example, to reduce inequalities in terms of wages between men and women. Could be some policies that would force businesses to hire people with disabilities, okay? Because again, otherwise they might struggle to find employment. Well, that's already pretty good, right? So that's another reason for which the government may want to intervene in a mixed economy. And number three, I'll delete that. Would be to achieve the main macroeconomic objective. So essentially what we are talking about, so we talk about the government, so we already talked about the central bank, so let's focus on fiscal and supply side policies. So essentially this, through fiscal policy and supply side policy, right? There will be videos of fiscal policy, supply side policies, so you'll have everything. And basically, you can identify what those main objectives are. So the government, they want to intervene in the economy to stimulate economic growth whenever there is a recession. In that case, we would like to implement an expansionary fiscal policy to try to boost production in the country. In fact, even a supply side policy would be effective in this case. Low unemployment, which is pretty similar whenever there is high unemployment in the economy, which tends to be the case when there is a recession. We want to implement an expansionary fiscal policy. The supply side policy could also help, as it would stimulate economic growth. And let's just call it price stability. Making sure that we don't have inflation or deflation, in fact, because deflation is also bad for an economy. So for example, if inflation is too high, then we would implement a contractionary fiscal policy. In fact, a supply side policy would also work, because by increasing AS, this decreases the price level. On the other hand, if inflation is very low, or even if we have deflation, why not? For example, if we have deflation, we may want to implement an expansionary fiscal policy, because this would lead to demand pull inflation and eventually eliminate the deflation. So yeah, there will be much more precise or detailed information about each of these macroeconomic objectives. You could add a few regarding the trade balance. Avoiding, it's always difficult to phrase this one. Large trade deficits. Remember, the trade deficit is a situation where we import much more than what we export. Why is it a problem? Because remember that imports are a leakage. And so if we import much, and exports are an injection, but if we import much more than what we import, sorry, if we import much more than what we export, it means that there is much more money flowing out than flowing in, which means that we are bleeding money, basically, not good. So that could be a one reason for which the government may want to intervene, perhaps by setting some protectionist policies like tariffs or import quotas, and the environmental protection on a large scale, because of course there are negative environmental externalities. So you could regard this as a form of a solution to a negative externality, but like on a more global scale, you know, like the overall energy policy of the country trying to transition towards something that is an energy policy that is going to be more renewable or more sustainable in the long run. This is also something that would be relevant. Okay, so that's about it. Remember that you should start by explaining what an economic system is, to explain what a mixed economy is, and then you can step by step analyze the three main tasks that a government must conduct in a mixed economy: correct market failures, reduce income inequalities, and achieve the main macroeconomic objectives. That's it. You know everything.